Good evening, traveler. How you doing? Doing good? I'm doing pretty good. This is not an argument against the Bible, nor an argument for abandoning faith. It is an invitation to something more demanding than obedience. Discernment. What happens when we stop asking only what we have been told is true and begin asking what reality itself is showing us? What happens when we take responsibility not only for what we believe, but for what our beliefs produce in us? If a teaching makes us less compassionate, less curious, less capable of listening, less willing to examine ourselves, perhaps the question is not merely whether the teaching is ancient, but whether we have understood its purpose. Because nothing in life is simple. And perhaps reverence begins when we stop pretending that it is. Nothing in life is simple. On Scripture, discernment, free will, and the responsibility to see. There is a saying I've heard in one form or another. If you can't trust the Bible, you can't trust any other book that came after it. It sounds simple. And as far as I have seen, nothing in life is. Because if you cannot trust a book, what exactly does that mean? Does it mean there is nothing valuable in it? Does it mean everything in it is false? Does it mean every person who reads it is deceived? Or does it mean that perhaps a book, like every other human artifact, requires discernment? That last possibility seems worth considering. Because if you cannot pay attention to what you are experiencing within yourself, and you cannot discern what it means, if you must continually outsource your inner authority to someone else, someone who may have less understanding of life than you do, but whom you were never taught to question, then you can be pushed around like a leaf at high tide. The wind of everybody else's assumptions, their certainties, their conclusions, their inherited fears, their interpretations, their wounds, their gods. And eventually, perhaps without even noticing, you are no longer living so much as being carried. I don't want that for myself. I don't want that for anyone. But everyone else's life is their own responsibility. All I can do is offer my perspective. If you don't study life, if you don't test reality, try this and try that, pay attention to what happens, observe the results, revise your assumptions. If you're always going by what everybody else says, then what exactly are you learning? You are learning what everybody else learned, and perhaps that is useful, but perhaps it is also where inquiry ends before it ever begins. We say, the Bible says so. Beloved, that is not good enough. Not because the Bible is worthless, no, but because you are responsible for what you do with what you read. You cannot look into a book to determine whether it feels right to stick your hand into a fire. Reality will speak to you. A book may be part of reality. Of course it is. It is a physical object. There is ink on paper. There are words. There is history. There are people who wrote it, preserved it, translated it, interpreted it, argued over it, loved it, hated it, lived by it, died for it. But the moment you begin reading that book, something else enters the room. You and your imagination. You begin constructing worlds, faces, landscapes, buildings, voices, cadences, motives, emotions. You hear a tone that was never printed on the page. You see a face the author never described. You imagine a world that may have never existed exactly as you are imagining it. Two people can read the same sentence and walk away carrying entirely different worlds. I cannot put evidence of that particular mystery into your hand, but I have lived enough life to recognize it. The human being is not a photocopier. We are interpreters. And that means discernment is not some optional accessory to spirituality. It is unavoidable. The question is whether we are going to practice it consciously. Nothing in life is simple. The human condition is vast and strange and beautiful and terrifying. No matter how many people you meet, there will still be someone out there whose existence you never fathomed could exist. I wish to hold reverence for that. Reverence for life, for consciousness, for this peculiar expression of life that we are. Because where do we think we came from? If life is diverse beyond anything we can comprehend, why would we imagine that the proper response to existence is to flatten it? Everything else in nature seems to express unity through diversity. Look at the forest. Look at the sky. Look beneath a microscope. Look at the human face, at fingerprints, at snowflakes, at ecosystems. Life does not seem terribly interested in producing identical copies of itself. And here we are, constantly demanding uniformity. Everybody put on the uniform, prim, proper, neat, tidy, correct. Even if you are a jewel pulled from the earth that has never been faceted, we need you to pretend that you already know what shape you are supposed to be. And seemingly innocuous things begin to happen. We begin sacrificing honesty for belonging, curiosity for certainty, experience for doctrine, discernment for obedience, and eventually, perhaps, reality itself for an idea about reality. You can tell me that God said so. You can tell me that the book says so. But if you are incapable of examining what your words produce, what your actions produce, what your habitual thoughts produce, then what good are those teachings doing you? And what good are they doing your fellow beings? Because our thoughts are not entirely harmless. Everything we continually return to begins shaping the landscape through which we perceive the world. If I repeatedly rehearse resentment, I become better at finding reasons to resent. If I repeatedly rehearse suspicion, I become better at finding evidence for suspicion. If I repeatedly rehearse contempt, I become more fluent in contempt. And if I repeatedly practice compassion, perhaps I become more capable of seeing where compassion is needed. This is not mystical speculation. We can observe ourselves. We can watch what happens. We can test it. That is the point. Pay attention. Some say the Bible only left out one thing: your opinion. Darling, don't fret. There is no shame in having one, but there is danger in treating your opinion as though it arrived from heaven merely because you found a verse capable of supporting it. That is lazy thinking. Not because opinions are bad, but because certainty without examination makes us blind to everything outside the frame. And that is where I think we have gotten ourselves into trouble. We become fascinated with sides, right side, wrong side, us, them, holy, unholy, saved, damned, good people, bad people, enemy, friend. We love the simplicity of the dividing line, but if you only think in black and white, you miss all the color between. And the color between is where human beings actually live. Nobody arrives on earth as a political position. Nobody is born as a theological argument. Nobody enters this world labeled enemy. There is simply a human being. Then comes experience, family, culture, pain, love, language, trauma, education, religion, fear, attachment, loss, and eventually that human being begins constructing a model of reality. Some models help us navigate. Some models imprison us. And some models do both. If someone is fixated on seeing life in black and white, I don't want to hate them for that. Perhaps that person is hurting. Perhaps certainty became a shelter. Perhaps ambiguity once felt dangerous. Perhaps nobody taught them how to sit with uncertainty without falling apart. Perhaps nobody taught them how to examine the architecture of their fear, their shame, their guilt, their anger, their grief, their memories. And when we are never taught how to work with those things, the human mind can flourish all manner of strange and darkly dreams. A phantasmagoria, inner theater, ghosts wearing the clothing of certainty, and sometimes those ghosts get handed down from generation to generation. One wounded person teaches another wounded person what the world is supposed to look like. The second person teaches a third, the third teaches a fourth, and eventually somebody says, "This is simply the way things are. C'est la vie." No. Perhaps it is simply the way things have been taught. There is a difference, and that difference matters. Because I am not asking you to abandon your faith. I am asking you to examine what your faith is doing. Does it make you more capable of love, more capable of mercy, more patient, more compassionate, more willing to understand, more capable of telling the truth without cruelty, more capable of admitting when you are wrong, more capable of changing your mind, more capable of seeing another human being as a human being? If so, then perhaps something beautiful is happening. But if your certainty makes you cruel, perhaps certainty itself deserves examination. Because standing against poor behavior does not require cruelty. Boundaries do not require contempt. Discernment does not require dehumanization, and disagreement does not require war. Cruelty does not become wisdom simply because someone attaches a sacred word to it. Sometimes wisdom can emerge from painful experiences, but cruelty itself is not healing. And if the only way we know how to defend what we believe is by hurting somebody else, perhaps we should pause long enough to ask what exactly we are defending. We say God is love, and then we say fear God. Why would I fear infinite love? Perhaps what I fear is not God. Perhaps what I fear is someone's finite description of God. And there is an enormous difference, as vast as that between light and darkness. Because a human being with a finite perspective can borrow another person's certainty until that certainty begins masquerading as God. No, thank you. I would rather stand at the threshold. I would rather admit, I don't know, and then keep looking, because I don't know is not the death of faith. It can be the beginning of honesty. And perhaps honesty is where discernment begins. You cannot have discernment while being completely fixated on somebody else's sin, especially when there's nothing you can do about it. You can spend your entire life pointing at everybody else's failures, or you can open the rest of the hand. Offer a little humanity. Look around. We live on this planet together right now. Not 2,000 years ago, not in the imagined world of our preferred interpretation, here, with one another. And the dead cannot save us from our actions now. The texts of the past can inform us, they can challenge us, they can inspire us, they can even transform us. But eventually the book closes, and you are still here, with your neighbor, with your family, with your enemy, with your own mind, with your own consequences, and that is where responsibility begins. We have an incredible responsibility, not only for what we do, but for the atmosphere we carry into the lives of other people. Because our atmosphere speaks for us before we ever open our mouth. The things we continually practice become part of the environment around us. Resentment practiced becomes an atmosphere. Contempt practiced becomes an atmosphere. Fear practiced becomes an atmosphere. So does patience. So does mercy. So does curiosity. So does love. We are constantly entering one another's atmospheres, and whether we realize it or not, we leave traces. That is why I care about this. Not because I need everyone to agree with me. I don't. Not because I think I possess the final interpretation of existence. I don't. And certainly not because I want to coerce anyone into believing what I believe. The moment I demand that you surrender your capacity to discern, I have contradicted the very thing I am asking you to practice. Free will means you can see the world differently than I do. You can disagree with me. You can reject everything I say. You can walk away. You can believe the Bible is divinely perfect. You can believe it is entirely human. You can believe something somewhere in between. But if you are going to believe something, beloved, believe it consciously. Know why. Examine it. Test it. Watch what happens. Watch what it produces. And remain willing to revise. Because we can become enablers of distortion simply by refusing to look at consequences. You can frighten someone into belief. You can shame someone into obedience. You can threaten someone into conformity, and perhaps they will comply. But compliance is not transformation. Fear is not wisdom. Coercion is not faith. And obedience to another person's idea of God is still obedience to another person's idea. We adore our polarized thinking because it gives us somewhere to stand. There is the enemy. Point at them. There is the problem. Point at them. There is the sinner. Point at them. And meanwhile, the hand doing the pointing has 4 fingers curled back toward itself. Perhaps that is why self-examination is so uncomfortable. It returns the gaze. The mirror is inconvenient. But I would rather be inconvenienced by reality than comforted by a lie. And I would rather discover that I was wrong while I am still capable of changing than discover that I was wrong after I spent my entire life hurting people to protect the idea that I was right. This is not a call for self-pity. Self-pity is not a virtue. You do not need to self-flagellate because you discovered that you were mistaken. You can simply say, I was wrong. Then learn. Repair what you can. Change what you can. And continue. That is not weakness. That is responsibility. So when I hear someone say, if you can't trust the Bible, you can't trust any other book that came after it, I want to ask, what if the question is too small? Our questions usually are. What if the question is not, which book can I trust? What if the deeper question is, can I trust myself to remain awake while I read it? Can I listen? Can I question? Can I observe? Can I distinguish the text from my interpretation of the text? Can I distinguish my interpretation from my emotional reaction? Can I distinguish my emotional reaction from reality? Can I notice when my certainty is protecting a wound? Can I recognize when I'm using sacred language to justify ordinary human cruelty? Can I change my mind without believing I have betrayed God? Can I love somebody without agreeing with them? Can I disagree with somebody without making them my enemy? Can I say, I don't know, and remain at peace? Because perhaps that is where reverence begins. Not with pretending we have understood everything, but with recognizing how much we have not. If you cannot see that, then perhaps you have closed the aperture. And once the aperture closes, all that remains is the little patch of reality you have decided is allowed to enter. You can live there if you want. Nobody can stop you. Not even God. That is the immense, terrifying sacredness of free will. But there are consequences. There are always consequences. The reins of your responsibility do not disappear because you refuse to hold them. They simply begin whipping wildly behind you. They catch somebody across the face. They wrap around somebody's ankles. They drag somebody behind the horse, and perhaps you never intended to hurt anyone, but intention does not erase consequence. This is why I keep returning to discernment. Because discernment is not merely deciding what is true. It is learning to participate responsibly in reality. And perhaps that is what every good teaching was trying to give us in the first place. Not another weapon. Not another reason to divide. Not another sacred permission slip for cruelty. But a way of becoming more awake, more honest, more compassionate, more responsible, more capable of seeing. So may we look deeper. May we consider gently. May we lay down the weapons. May we open our ears. May we open our eyes. May we open our mind. May we open the heart. And if the teachings we have inherited were truly pointing toward love, mercy, patience, compassion, and understanding, then perhaps the greatest way to honor them is not to defend them at all costs. Perhaps it is to live them. Because if a teaching makes us incapable of seeing the human being standing directly in front of us, then we have somehow missed the human being. And if we miss the human being while arguing about God, what exactly have we been worshiping? The ink? The interpretation? The authority? The fear? The identity? The side? Or the living mystery standing before us? I don't know, but I know this. I do not want to spend my one strange, improbable life arguing over who is allowed to be human. I want to learn how to be one. And I want to learn how to live beside others who are learning too. Nothing in life is simple. That is not a defect. That is the wonder. So let us stop trying to flatten existence into black and white. It hasn't worked before. I'm starting to think it never will. Let us recover the color. Let us study life. Let us test reality. Let us examine ourselves. Let us pay attention to what our thoughts become when we feed them. Let us pay attention to what our words become when they enter another person's heart. Let us pay attention to what our beliefs become when we put them into practice. And when we discover that something we have believed is producing suffering, perhaps we can love the truth enough to change. Because there are people all around us, and they are not footnotes. They are not obstacles. They are not abstractions. They are not characters in our theology. They are alive right here. And I think the most sacred part of existence may be our responsibility to one another. So, beloved, open the hand. Look again. The world is larger than the page, and if the page was ever pointing anywhere worth going, perhaps it was pointing here, right now, in this present moment. In this time, we live together with one another on this very planet. We don't have to work together, but I will tell you this. You can stand there pointing a finger until your very last breath if you want to. In the meantime, I am going to keep the rest of my hand open. And if that is not what your doctrine, your God, your Messiah has been teaching, then get thee hence, thou powerless human creation. I know thee not.